Good evening and happy Monday, everybody. It's great to be here again. It's great to be doing mock interviews again. We hope that you're staying safe wherever you may be during COVID 19, be it in the Bay Area or be it out in Montana. It's Monday night and we're back for another mock interview with Corey Hiramoto. We've been here for the past 7 months helping job seekers, and we're back with another episode with Armand Damaluski, a data analyst. This is also another unique one where it's an all Santa Clara University webinar because Corey is a Santa Clara grad and so is Armand and so am I. So the rules of tonight's session are pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and my audio here in a moment, and Corey's going to go ahead and interview Armand with a pre-selected job description and his resume. You, the audience, get to watch, offer your feedback, and ask your own interview questions as well, so that you can get better at your own interviews and possibly throw in a couple of wrenches so that Armand can get the real life feel. All right, Corey, going to hand it over to you, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For those of you who will be watching the recording later on, sorry that you weren't able to watch it live. But hopefully we could answer a lot of questions that you may have gotten during your interviews. Whenever I do these practice interview sessions, I try and create as realistic of a either problem or scenario that you would actually get in an interview. I do recruit for analyst roles at my current company, so I am pretty familiar with what we look for from both the feedback as well as interview perspective. So how it's going to work, pretty much I'll be jumping back and forth between Armand's resume / LinkedIn, which he has graciously volunteered here, and then he's also provided me a sample job description for an analyst role at Stripe, which is a pretty cool company. So I'll be jumping back and forth, and I created custom questions based on Armand's background as well as what this job description is looking for. I'll also be checking the chat periodically. So if you see like a gray little box appear up right here, that's me checking the Zoom chat to see what the audience would like me to talk about next. I've also got my own pre-created questions right over here. And then for those of you who do need or are looking for additional job seeking advice, I've got my own YouTube channel. It's just Career Shakers on YouTube. I've got stuff for LinkedIn, resume, interviews, networking, all these different types of things. So feel free to check that out as well. All right. So Armand, before we get into the practice interview session itself, why don't you just give everybody in the audience a quick little introduction of yourself, and then maybe talk about some of the different roles and companies or industries that you're targeting. You can kind of use this as a great little platform for yourself and see if there's any great listeners or followers out there who may have an opportunity for you.
Sure. So my name is Armand Damaluski. I've been a friend of Albert's actually since college, and I was a major in economics at Santa Clara University. I've done work in a variety of fields focused on economics, data analysis, public policy. And my career initially started out actually as an economic analyst. I was working on tax credit policy, the thrilling world of new markets, tax credit analysis versus opportunity tax credit zones. And as interesting as that work was, I found that I was more and more drawn to sort of two types of problems that weren't really available for me to solve there. One is problems involving people, where I could work with a large collaborative team, help work people in product, help people in engineering sort of function in a way that provided input and analysis to multiple stakeholders. But second is also just like more complex data analysis. And so what you'll find over time is like I did work as a field organizer in politics. I worked as a partnerships manager for the Golden State Opportunity Foundation. And throughout that work, I was both doing work that was, intersecting with enormous amounts of people, helping them solve problems, but also increasing my sort of data fluency and quantitative skill set. And so I started using SQL a little bit in my first job as a field organizer, but probably most extensively starting at the Golden State Opportunity Foundation, then working at Resistance Labs, where it was a company that did online texting for progressive local campaigns. And so we worked with large databases to figure out voter data and targeting. And then more recently, I worked for Calvert College, which is California's first online community college. Unfortunately, while my work there was, I really enjoyed it. I think we made a really important impact. It was a state agency at a time of COVID. There were a lot of budget cuts, and I was, along with 10 of my colleagues, sort of for the brunt of that recently. And so now I'm looking for opportunities. I think I've done a lot of public policy work, private sector work, and I'm more interested. There's an epic stripe is sort of the intersection of data-oriented problems, but I'm most excited about using them in sort of the online technology space. I think that, a lot of what we did at Calvert was really exciting, but the stuff that sort of slowed us down continuously was sort of the government aspect of it. And working in the private sector is exciting for me because you can, pull up a dashboard, figure out some insights, make a recommendation, and it happens within days or weeks. It's really cool to see sort of the cause and effect of that, and I want to explore that more.
Awesome. So if any of you guys are plugged into that space, Armand, what's the best way for them to reach you? Through your LinkedIn?
Yeah, through my LinkedIn.
All right, cool. So yeah, I'll be jumping back and forth. So if you guys have any opportunities for him, this will be a great way to show your appreciation and thanks for Armand being so brave and volunteering in front of all of you to run through some of these realistic interview practice questions.
Awesome.
And if we could also show some love for Armand in the chat, that would be fantastic. I'm sure everybody is really, really happy that you're here. And we are taking volunteers. So if anyone else wants to do practice interview sessions, you don't need to be an analyst. We've done all different types of mock interview sessions. So if you guys want to sign up, let me or Albert know. And we'd love to have you on next week or the week after that. Alrighty, so let's get into the practice questions here, Armand. Let's start with a warm-up question. So Armand, super excited for you to apply for this data analyst role here at Stripe. Really excited about your background. Can you talk to me about your most recent role at Calbright College? And when you talk about your role, can you just talk a little bit about like some of the projects you were working on, and then also talk to me about the tech stack you were using?
Sure. So I was a business and market analytics manager at Calbright College. My role is primarily sort of to do two basic things. One is sort of just look at our data analytics. So there was like website analytics, which I used, Google Analytics. And that was also looking at sort of the performance data of our digital advertising. So like the tech stack there, to be honest, a little embarrassed is like rudimentary. I basically just like looked at the Facebook ad data, looked at the Bing ad data, looked at, the Google ad data, Ad Studio, things like that directly. Part of what I was working on in the longer term was building that out past having it. We were flowing it into Google Sheets and just having it more. We had a script that would pull the data once a day and put it there, but we were trying to build it out into our Salesforce and Tableau integration. So that was sort of the online analytics side, and there's also economic analysis. There, my stack was primarily, Tableau for data visualization, utilizing SPSS for like statistical stuff that was a little more high powered than stuff that could be done in Excel. And then when I use SQL queries through our database, I either did it directly through our Salesforce integration, which was sort of where we stored most of our data. In previous roles, when I've used SQL, it's been through Amazon Athena.
Interesting. Okay. And then I think you mentioned that you had a team. How big was the team that you directly managed?
So at Calbright, I did not manage a team directly, but at my previous role, when I was an analytics manager and a senior campaigner at Resistance Labs, I had a team of 5 that I managed.
Awesome.
I started as a junior campaigner. Well, actually, I was just started as a campaigner because there were no junior campaigners, and then we hired junior campaigners, so I became the senior campaigner and I managed those folks.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. And then the folks that you were managing, they were, I guess I'm not familiar with the definition of campaigner, but were they also data analysts?
So there was a team of 5. 3 of them were more like, I would say, the equivalent of operations. So they did some very rudimentary, like I taught them how to do reporting. And so when we launched like a text messaging campaign, they would report out the results. But then 2 of them were focused on data science and data analysis. So one of them was an academic researcher. So when we ran experiments, that was the person who used Stata, and we would do a variety of like charts, but also like a variety of like multivariate experiments, things like that with them. And then the other person is more of less data science, like they couldn't code, but they were like a data analyst, and I managed that person as well.
Perfect. Okay, great. That was a really good summary. So this is like another version of a tell me about yourself or walk me through your
Sure.
resume type question. I just changed it up a little bit. I made it a little bit more specific. Sometimes companies may only be interested in either your current role or like your last two roles, and they wouldn't want you to go through like your entire background. So one of the biggest mistakes I've seen from people that I've interviewed and coached is you have your preset script that you've been
Mm,
practicing all week, and then when the person's like, just tell me about your current role, and you're like, awesome. So I graduated university in 2013. I was a finance major. And then we're like, well, that's not what we asked you. Like, we asked you to just talk about your current role. So I wanted to try a different type of question this week. That was the whole point of that. Armand did a really
mm,
good job. He also was very cognizant of what I was asking for, which is why when I asked for the tech stack, and he told me that he's working mostly with Google Analytics, Facebook Analytics, he also threw in his previous experience and how he was using SQL more at his last role. Because if you look at the job description, um, it does require SQL. And
yeah.
because he knew that he wasn't getting that, he wasn't going to be able to show me that by talking about his work at Fulbright. He added that into his story, which is super super critical, right? It makes me want to continue to talk and learn more about his SQL experience. So really good job, Armand.
Thank you.
Let me just check the chat real quick. Oh yeah, lots of love. Thanks, Armand. Hearts, heart
Oh.
emoji, heart emoji. Yes, love it. Okay, cool. All right. So speaking of SQL,
Mhm.
Armand, you know that this role, as you can tell from my job description that I wrote, we are definitely looking for someone who is highly skilled in SQL. So if you could self-rate your proficiency in SQL on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being like full mastery, where would you currently rate yourself and why?
I consider myself probably somewhere around a 4, in the sense that when I was doing it, I definitely used that skill at Calbright, but because at Calbright I was doing a variety of different projects and tasks, I wasn't like in the weeds in it every day like I used to. I would lean more in the like 4.4 range, like when I was doing it 100% all day at Resistance Labs. But there's the thing about SQL is that it's one of those things that um, it's easy to pick up quickly, and you can take a course honestly even in a week and know it fluently. But to know what I found most difficult is like unique scenarios or how to utilize it or the problems it causes and like larger scale data sets and things like that. And I've seen folks who could look at like a problem I was banging my head against the wall for like an hour, and because they've been doing it for much longer than I have, they could see the patterns and see the problem solving better. So I think I'm pretty decent. I'm a 4, but definitely could use more experience, more mastery.
Okay, good. So I think the only wrong answer here is you pick like a 1 or you pick like a 5. Both of them would be, in my opinion, not so great answers, because if you pick a 5, then that would mean that you have nothing more to learn. And then like what would you do when you start here, right? Like if you have no
Right.
desire to learn or you feel like you've already mastered everything, then either A, this job will be very boring for you, or B, we would be wondering like how like where your level of confidence would come from. And then of course if you had some type of example to kind of explain or articulate to the person why it's a 4.4, why it's a 4 and not a 5, that'd be super helpful too. I'm not a highly technical person, but some of the it's examples I've gotten in the past is like, well, Corey, I would say I'm a 4 because I know how to do some of the more complex queries, but I don't know how to do some of the different joins or whatever, right?
Right.
That would also give, especially someone like if you're doing like a recruiter screen like this is emulating right now, and you know that the person
Mm,
doesn't have a technical background, you may want to give them some examples of
mm,
like SQL or Python or whatever engineering role it is you're applying for. Like also being able to articulate the difference between 4 and 5 and like good and great also
mm.
just really highlights your technical ability, right?
Okay.
If you can actually demonstrate to a non-technical person or give them examples as to what separates certain levels, like good versus great, that also actually just kind of enhances your capabilities as a candidate, right?
Gotcha.
Cool. Um, so, Armand, what are you looking for in your next role company, or even both, right? Like, what is it going to take for you to accept an offer from us at Stripe over any other company?
I think I'm really looking for two broad things in my career at this point. One, I'm looking for a place to grow and to learn more and learn at a faster rate. I think one of the challenges I've noticed in places I thrive versus places that, I still did my best to do well at, but I felt like I wasn't growing, was when I was given the opportunity to sort of hit the ground running on day one, get work done, but also continuously innovate, grow, and learn new things. And that's one thing I've really seen about Stripe's culture when I was reading about its mission, and that I've seen consistently in the press, is that Stripe has a really strong culture of like attracting folks who are really qualified, but then also pushing them and helping them constantly get better. And then the second thing I'm really looking for is the opportunity to work on the sort of problem. I always say this is like work on hard problems with good people. I think when you're working on problems that are really important and difficult, like the ones that Stripe is facing of trying to integrate like payments across the entire global landscape, right? The ambition of Stripe is to grow the GDP of the internet economy. You are facing really difficult challenges, and those are really interesting. You also need to be working with like extremely good people to make that work. And everyone I've met consistently from Stripe has always said, one, great things about them, but two, has seemed to be excellent. And anytime I've worked with them in different capacities, they've been excellent. And often that tells me more about like a company and its culture than anything else, is like, how do I feel about working with the folks who are part of it?
Mm-hmm. Nice. So this is like another like a variation of like the why do you want to work here type question, or what makes you qualified to work here, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like a slightly different spin on it. I think Armand's answer was actually really good. He showed that he did research about the company. He did like a subtle little flex there that he's been networking and talking with folks at Stripe, which is also very, very good. And I'm sure that that also helped him get some of that research and information about the company and the mission and what they're trying to do, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that part of his answer was fantastic. He also picked things that were tangible and easy to like articulate as to why he would be looking for something. And it's nothing that would be concerning to any recruiter or hiring manager as to like your ambition or desire to join their company for those specific reasons. If possible, and this question wasn't designed for that, but if you guys do get the version of like, why do you want to work here? I would also try to incorporate examples, right? So if Armand, like when Armand was talking about, I really want to solve complex problems, then he could slyly slip in there like, oh, like at my last company, I was asked to solve blah, 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 blah. And it was really fun figuring out my solution about how to do that. I put together this, SQL database that connected with Salesforce and whatever, right? If you could slip in like subtle little examples like that as well in your story, that would be even better. For Armand, I didn't design the question that way, so he doesn't need to slip in the example. But for those folks who are wondering how to answer like a why do you want to work here question, that is something you would definitely want to incorporate. So well done so far. You're doing really good.
Thank you.
Let me just check the chat here. Oh, okay. Yeah, if you guys have any questions that you want Armand and I to run through from an interview perspective, let me know. I also see general questions about the analyst or analytics field, which I'll get to at the end of the call. But if anyone has practice questions for us that you want us to run through, please don't be shy. Speaking of practice questions, I do have a question that is a audience submission from Albert. So Armand, why are you so interested in payments? Why not any other industry?
The reason I'm really interested in payments is because as someone who's, I studied economics, a lot of my roles have been in economics. Payments is right now at the global beating heart of the entire like internet economy, right? Like for a long time, we've sort of had this era of like increasing digitalization, increasing e-commerce. But when the pandemic hit, like that skyrocketed exponentially. And now like if you are interested in economics, and you're interested in how the global economy functions, like being in payments is the place to be, period. One of the things that was really exciting to me in like 2008, 2009, when I was first studying economics, was watching in real time as sort of there were like large economic debates about what was happening in the country. And I felt like the first job I had out of college working on tax credit policy gave me the chance to be at the heart of it. And now I see that like, e-commerce, and specifically a company like Stripe that tries to and has enabled, like through things like Stripe Atlas, like tons of online business. I think that just, you want to be in any field or any moment at the heart of it. And this feels like payments feels like the heart of it right now to me.
So I'm really glad that Albert crafted this type of question, because it was actually a really good question for Armand to have because of his industry and prior experience before shifting over into like a fully analytics focused type role. And so it actually played beautifully into your strengths, honestly. And then you did a really good job of connecting that to your previous roles. I think if you could have gone a little bit deeper and given an example of a time where, getting an economics degree or working in public policy, et cetera, studying or doing certain studies or things around the economy and payments, if you could have incorporated that into your story, it just would have elevated it like another level. Because it's very unique for someone to have directly relevant industry experience when it comes down to what type of data
Yeah.
someone would be analyzing. Same thing goes for product analyst type roles, data analyst type roles. If you do have that relevant either industry or prior experience, it only helps you. And for those of you who are joining the Zoom call, if you could please put yourself on mute, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much. And for Armand's situation, he is slightly unique as a candidate, right? Because he didn't start his work experience in this field, and he's had quite a few different roles before ultimately arriving at a job that he loves. And so if you are in a similar situation where you've maybe done a boot camp or you've done a master's program and now you're trying to get your first role, also be cognizant of the strengths you may have outside of just your analytics or technical expertise, but also your domain or product or industry knowledge, and then weave that into your story as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely just like as a side note, something I'm a little nervous about is just that I have such varied experience, and so being able to tell like a coherent story and like why this role,
Yeah.
this thing I was a little nervous about. So thank you for
No
pointing
problem.
that out.
Gene, great question. What is your expected salary? We will not be going through salary negotiation tips and tricks on this one, but Albert, I believe, has a webinar coming up for salary negotiations. I'm sure he'll put a link up somewhere, or we'll link it up there. But yeah, that's actually very good question to ask. Yeah, Santa Clara, represent. Awesome. Okay. Why don't I do one of my questions, and then I'll go back to the chat and ask this question from, I think it's Jean is how I pronounce that, or Gian. I'm sorry if I butchered it, but I will get to your question after this one. So Armand, what dashboards or reports have you built that I was going to say are currently or were currently being used by more than 15 users?
So at my last role at Calvert College, when we were launching, we essentially didn't really have a digital ad operation period. And so I sort of took ownership of spearheading that, and that included also building the reporting capacity. So on one hand, I was actually designing the digital ads, not doing the creative myself, working with the creative team, but like doing the targeting, looking at the data. But I also worked with the engineering team to build scripts so that it would flow into a Google Sheet. So initially, I built which we frankly used way too long, but sort of a product metrics dashboard for all of our digital advertising, and which would show a real-time report of like how many people had clicked, what the conversion rates were, what the cost of acquisition was, what it was for different programs, and you could break it down by day, by week, by month. And eventually we transitioned that as we transitioned to a Salesforce integration and got Tableau basically working. We were able to, I then moved that data from from Facebook into Salesforce into a Tableau data visualization. And that is being used at the very least seen by about 30 to 40 people, and I know actively check, but at least like 10 to 15 per week, since it's a sort of a real-time metric of like how our digital ad stuff is performing.
And then what are some of the key KPIs or things you want to make sure that are being highlighted, measured, and tracked in your report?
So CAC, like cost of acquisition, it was absolutely super important. Cost of conversion, sorry. Basically, how much it costs to get a person to go from like looking at one of our ads, clicking the ad, and then signing up on the website. That was by far the most important. But second was because we were trying to like recruit a diverse pool of students, looking at our metrics on what the ranges are for all of our students based on education, ethnicity, gender, age. Our mission was to make sure that we incorporate like a very diverse student body. And so I actually built metrics around that to make sure that we could adjust our advertising and targeting that way so that we were representative of the student body population of California. And then I would say more immediate, and there are also like intermediate KPIs we built, which like weren't the ultimate goal, but were really helpful, I think, in understanding like what drove the final one. So when we built like our pipeline for acquisition, because we're in education, is like fairly long, right? Like you have to click on the ad, you sign up, you go through the application. And so when I was able to build like more nuanced metrics along each part of the pipeline, I could then identify like where we were losing people. And so I was like, oh, we're spending a ton of money to get people to our application, but then they're falling off at the application. Maybe we should tweak this in this page to make it easier to understand. And that would increase the ultimate KPI of like how much it costs us to acquire users.
Perfect. Love that. Okay. Good answer. Now, why did I ask this question, or what is the point of the question? So asking about the number of users for reports is actually one of the ways that we can measure scope and impact of an analyst in a given role. So the more people or the more eyeballs that are using your report, the essentially more important it is, and also therefore a slight, I guess, measurement of the complexity of your work and like how you're able to solve bigger business problems for your company, your team, your manager, etc. And so sometimes you may be asked questions about like how many users have used your report, or how did you build it, etc., etc. So it's a mixture of like understanding how big of a role you have, but also another opportunity for you to flex your technical skill set. So one thing Armand did was he talked about how he actually built the report itself, what it was designed to do. Uh, Ideally, it would have been great if he could have mentioned something about SQL, just because this role specifically, if I shift back to the job
Yeah.
description, does require SQL, but like, he was focusing on something from Fulbright, which he didn't use SQL. So
I mean,
in
I
terms
did
of,
actually in that process. I used SQL. I used SQL in this when we did the Salesforce like integration in
yeah,
Salesforce itself. You can do SQL commands. So I should have gone more into depth in that of like the way that we pulled the data into into Salesforce, and then the way that we moved it into Tableau was all a bunch of SQL queries.
yeah.
So I don't know. I guess I should have mentioned that more explicitly. So.
Oh, okay, okay. There you go. There's one improvement point right there. One of the
Yeah.
other parts of Armand's answer that I really like, though, is how he walked me through the KPIs that he built, and then how he kind of reverse engineered some for his clients or stakeholders, right? And that was towards the end of his answer when he was talking about how, well, I was able to create this KPI, which ultimately led to us to figure out that there was a problem with the sign up form. So then we fixed that, and then we could finally get to the cost per acquisition or whatever that we wanted at the very end. That is actually very valuable as an analyst, because that's essentially what they pay you to do, right? Like, yes, we pay you because you know how to do SQL, but we really pay you to provide to analyze data and provide recommendations. And that's the real big differentiator, in my opinion, between an average analyst and a fantastic analyst, is being able to provide that business context and actually make recommendations, not just build a report in Tableau. So that actually shined like bright for me with Armand's answer, which I really liked. Cool. All right, now we're getting a lot of good community questions here. So why don't we go with that? Can you tell me about a time when you had to work with a disagreeable person who was also on the same project as you? How did you handle it?
I smiled because I used to work in politics, which is full of very passionate people who have strong opinions about everything. And so I actually sort of disagree that, I'm sure they're out there. I don't think I've encountered anyone I'd fully sort of mark as like, you are a disagreeable person. I think people are disagreeable in certain contexts and with certain personalities, and they approach problems differently. I certainly if I think about my last job, one of my challenges I had was when I operated on one team working for the COO, I actually had to work with the CTO, and the CTO and the COO themselves just had some sort of power clashes and conflicts. And so even though I, as a individual, had no issue with the CTO, I had to access data. And I sort of kept being bounced around between conflicts that were sort of above my pay grade. And I don't think anyone in the particular situation was a disagreeable person, but it was felt, I guess, disagreeable to work with them. And the way that I managed it is sort of twofold. One is that in any situation which is contentious like that, and you're dealing with people who are, frankly, like a more power than you, I think it's really, really important to overdo stakeholder feedback, and then having everything written and clarified, and making sure there's buy-in for everything. So sort of just rigorously go through and document and clarify and make sure that everybody feels heard. But then second is that if there is a conflict that can't be resolved, because there are some instances where there was just a flat out conflict, ultimately you'll have to escalate things and ask folks to resolve those issues, because it's preventing you from getting your job done. But I think that even in this relationship only happened once. 90% of the time, it's sort of just figuring out what the other person wants, what's causing the friction, and sort of trying to get to the same page of how you can either resolve the situation, or you can, either resolve the situation or figure out another way to solve your problem that doesn't involve sort of pushing this conflict with the person. In any organization, there's just so much you need to do and so many priorities that I've seen people waste enormous amounts of effort just fighting someone over and over again, when the solution was a lot easier, either through reconciliation or another solution.
Okay. Are
So
you
I was a little
familiar with?
rambling. I apologize.
It's okay. Are you familiar with the STAR technique or the STAR method?
I know, I haven't heard that.
So it's basically just a format that you would follow to answer any behavioral type question. And any behavioral
Gotcha.
type question is one that basically starts with, tell me about a time, or give me an example where. So this is one of those types of questions. And STAR is just an acronym that stands for situation. There's my hand so you can see it. Situation, task, action, result. This is just the structure to help keep your answer organized and easy for the interviewer to follow. So the situation basically is what you did. You gave context of why or how a person was being disagreeable. The task is what you were specifically assigned to do with that, in this case, disagreeable person, and what you were in charge of doing and accomplishing. This is also where typically you answer the question. And then the action is how you actually went about doing it or solving the problem. For technical questions or technical stuff about SQL or Python or whatever, this is also where you would demonstrate your technical ability. And then of course the R is the most important part, which is what happened, right? The result. So your S, T, and A were actually very strong. I really liked how in your action you also walked me through the two different approaches, right? I would do this, or if it's this type of person, I would do this. And then the only thing that was kind of missing for me to round out the whole answer was the result itself.
Yeah.
And then the result really needs to be memorable, I should say. So for example, a not so good result would be, they were kind of disagreeable, but I just talked to them and then it was fine.
Right.
Because then I'm that's how you would end the answer, and then I'm just kind of oh,
yeah,
okay. So if Armand does run into somebody here that is disagreeable, he'll just talk to them, and then hopefully it works out, I guess. Instead, it's
if I can give. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, please go.
Maybe give it a shot for the R.
Yeah.
The result was that not only did I get the access to the data I needed in that specific situation, I was also able to use this as a way to like build empathy and build a relationship with this colleague that I needed the data from. And so in future requests, I needed to do a lot less like hand holding and explanation because I built a trust, really putting in the work to understand their perspective the first time. And that's why I often think it's valuable, even if like when conflict seems like it's like way too much energy, if you can use that as an opportunity to build a relationship, it can turn a disagreeable person into an agreeable person.
Love that. That's perfect. Especially since this person was like the CTO, where you're probably going to have to go to
Yeah.
consistently
Yeah.
do your job. Yeah, definitely an important result to cover. Very good. Thank you for that question. Whoever provided that, and I'm sure I butchered your name. I'm so sorry. Wow, there's a lot of questions. I love the participation. We'll circle back to your question there, Bill, at the end. Oh, it's pronounced John. So sorry. Okay. How have you been able to work remotely in your previous role? I guess I should say in your previous role. What obstacles have you encountered and overcome while working remotely?
I think my answer to this is a little bit unique in that I've worked remotely for much of my career. The
Great.
political work that I did was remote because we managed campaigns across the entire country. Calvert College was an online college, and so while we had an office, 90% of the time we worked remote. And so it's something that I've worked in an office full time, I've worked remote full time, I've managed to do fine in both. The things that I have had to overcome working remotely really are just that I think especially acute during the pandemic is like the sense of being a little bit isolated from your colleagues, not feeling like you're part of a larger team growing. It can feel a little bit like you're disparate. And the way I think I managed that is actually at my last role, I sort of became the impromptu social chair during the pandemic, and that like I'd organize our weekly Calibrate happy hours and things like that. And I think that was really helpful to both for the morale of the company, but also just like for my own sense of feeling like it's not just me sitting away and coding and like anonymous people sending me Slack messages. It's like you're part of a larger effort.
Okay. Jaspreet, let us know if that's an answer that you are satisfied with as as an interviewer. I've actually seen this question come up a lot more recently just because of COVID. The crux of the question basically is, look, if I hire you and you work remotely, how will I know that you'll be a good performer even though you're not in the office, and or I'm not able to keep you accountable?
What
So
are
Armand's answer is actually very
yeah.
good, because he basically started off by saying, look, I've actually always worked remotely. So this is not new for me, and I've been able to do it successfully. Now, what he could have done to add to his answer was, like, for example, while working in, at my previous company, I was, given the highest performance rating possible, or something like that, right? Where basically you give someone the confidence that I've done it my entire career and I've been very good at it. How would you convince somebody that you're very good at it? You can talk about, I don't know, performance ratings, or like a really big important project that you did, things like that. And there's a little interview buddy on your shoulder right there.
This is
He's
a
giving
great
you all the right
example
answers.
of a remote obstacle I've had to overcome. Is
Yeah.
definitely real life can sometimes get in the way. And I've managed to, so yeah, actually that's like a perfect example probably of, but what I found is, yeah, previous roles, even when I was embarrassed about like, oh, my dog getting in the way or other interruptions, I found that I've been able to, I got when I was at Golden State Opportunity, I got promoted from a junior role to a senior role while being 100% remote. When I moved
Boom.
to Resistance Labs, like I started as the one campaigner and I built out a team of 5 people working for me, all
Boom.
remote.
Love it. That is a very good answer. Very, very good answer. Oh, I like this question. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
Ideally, I see myself at Stripe in 5 to 10 years. more specifically, I would love to be managing sort of a larger team of analysts and data science folks. I think leading a team working on analytics at Calvert was really interesting. Love working in various fields in this space, and I think the ability to both like have more advanced technical skills, but then also like grow and mentor a team that can have a large impact, company scale, is where I'd love to see my career going, because I think it combines my skill sets from a technical, intellectual way, but also as a leader and a manager.
Good. So I really like this question, especially because I actually have a video on how to answer this question of where do you see
Oh,
yourself in 5 years, right down here, which is actually perfect. You guys can check that out if you want to. The crux of the answer, though, basically should be you're still at the company, which Armand nailed it right off the bat. And number two is basically talking about how you plan on learning and growing while you're within the role, gaining additional responsibilities. The things that they don't want to hear right off the bat are that you're going to leave the company, or that you want to get promoted within 2 years, and then you want to have you want to have your boss's job, and you don't like how your current company treats you, and that's why you want to come here, and whatever. So this is more of like the things you should not, like, this is a question that's designed more to see what you don't say as
mm.
opposed to what you do say. So it's kind of a trick question in that regard. So Armand did a very good job dodging those potential pitfalls. I think Albert had a pretty good question here, if I can just find that one. Today, we live in a very contentious and polarized world. How would you convince someone that the data you are presenting is in fact real, despite their protests and reactions that it is fake, doctored, manipulated, etc.?
I think it's a great question given the climate we're in today, and it's something I've seen evolve in my roles over time. Is that even within the same company, there used to be a lot more of a shared understanding and trust of data and evidence, and I've seen over time that people are a little more skeptical, especially if it disagrees with like the way that they want to move forward the company or the decisions they want to make. Um, what I try to do in situations like that is find a place of sort of shared ground truth. So, for example, like in the same company, we're all generally looking at the same like internal data sets. And if I can point them to like, well, this is what I pulled it from, this is what I did, that is one way to go there. Another way is if we're looking at sort of external data, right? So I've had a situation at work previously, actually at Calbright, where we had a vendor that was doing some digital ads for us. And I said that our tests indicated like X, Y, and Z results. And one of our senior colleagues just didn't trust us. She's, I have worked in education for this long. This is not how students think. And so what I did was say, that's a great point. Like, I think your experience suggests that we should dig a little more deeply into this. And I found that like doing this in a big, loud context, like we're presenting to everybody, does not work. Nobody wants to be called out and said like they're wrong. What you do is then have an individual conversation with them, figure out why they're skeptical, what they're skeptical of, and sort of recreate the chain of evidence. In the same way that police officers or like courts are supposed to recreate a chain of custody. And I think if you work that way, you'll often find that you're able to persuade people, even if they were initially skeptical. And it worked at Calbright for me. That person eventually turned around, agreed with my opinion, and then became a big champion, actually, of like the direction I was recommending for our ad campaign.
That was so good. That was so good. That deserves a
Thank you.
clap. That deserves a big clap. So why was it so good? It was really good because the question didn't prompt him to give an example, but he already had one teed up ready to go, which is the best way to answer any type of question, is to show rather than just tell. And then he did a really good job wrapping up the result, right? Not only did he convince this person, which we all kind of knew that was going to be the result because that's what the question was about, but then he took it one step further, which is demonstrating and showing how he was able to create buy-in and et cetera, et cetera. And then he also walked us through his process, which is really important here. He talked about how sometimes you need to like, don't call them out in front of lots of people, have a separate one-on-one meeting, recreate the chain of events to create buy-in, that was also very, very important. So I love that answer. That was so good.
Oh, thank you.
Big claps. Big claps there. All right. Okay, yeah. Oh, good question here. Let's go with this one. So last question, and then we'll get into the questions about the role itself and interviewing techniques, things like that. So thank you, Neville, for this question. What is your process when you start a new project?
So when I start the new project, first of all, it depends on whether it's a project that I've sort of spearheaded myself. So there have been times in my career, for example, when I was at Resistance Labs, where I would basically propose like a type of campaign. So we're going to be texting these and these people with this and this message to see what works, what doesn't, then expand that out. Versus I'm told what to do by a superior. So for the first example, I sort of sit down, plan out for myself what the outcomes I want to get are, why those outcomes matter, and then work backwards for a timeline and for resources needed to get that done. And then if it's something that's assigned to me, I really try to gain that same information, but make sure that it's whoever assigned that to me, that we're on the same page of it. So I talk to them, ask them a bunch of questions, say, okay, you want this done by this time. Well, let's work backwards. That means you want this and this done at this point. You want the data for this and this. Well, I'm going to need this and these resources, and work through them. So the process is similar in the sense that you're really trying to figure out from the end result what you need going backwards. But there's a big difference between like whether it's something you've decided to do, and then versus whether it's something that's assigned to you, because how you basically what your end goal has to be can differ based on that.
And then what's your process if it's assigned to you?
So if it's assigned to me, I ask a lot of questions in the beginning, sort of to try to figure out, okay, like this is what you think the goal is. I think that'll take like this long to get this done, this long to produce this, so on and so forth. I think I'll have to work with this team and this team. So I ask them sort of the timeline or resource questions. And then I also ask stakeholder questions, because no project in a large organization entails only like, one unit. A good example of this actually at Calbright was that I was responsible for sort of building Salesforce data dashboards for a variety of the units of the college, from student success to academic advising to the communications team. And so one of the things I discerned was, okay, well, I'm going to need to set up all these stakeholder conversations to see that both get their buy-in, but also understand like what they want from this project, and then bring that back to the boss who initially signed it, and sort of create sort of a loop, continuous loop as we execute, but also make sure that we're delivering not only what the individual signed it wants, but what the various stakeholders need or want, and try to resolve that if there are any differences. And in the example there, we were able to accomplish that pretty successfully. And by the end of that process, every team at Calbright had their own custom dashboard where they opened up Salesforce that showed them the metrics that were important to them, and something that we could continuously tweak and evolve as their needs evolved.
Nice. Okay. So the only thing I think I want to point out is, like Armand did, if you're going to draw two different scenarios or cases, make sure that you are walking through both of those different cases. And then I think answer selection here is also really important. In your particular situation, I would have picked an example that was more analytics focused, like you did for the second one, as opposed to when you were talking about creating certain marketing campaigns for Fulbright. Just because this is an analyst type role, and an analytics type role, excuse me.
Got it.
So the answer selection there would also be very, very critical when you're answering this type of question.
So the question about like building the dashboards, that was like more of what you were looking for there.
Yeah. So because like you would be working very closely with your stakeholders / clients, gathering requirements, reiterating dashboards, advising, etc. This question is probably more for like more client, I would say like front end focused analyst roles, and understanding like what is your process when you are creating and working on dashboards with your clients. That's kind of what this question would ultimately be used for. So
gotcha.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great job today. Let's everyone give
Sure.
Armand a round of
Aw.
applause. That was fantastic. He did so good. I think there's a lot of really good learning lessons that we were able to get both in um, what like some of the questions that you potentially will be getting, as well as how to go about answering a lot of those. So why don't I just reserve a few minutes here at the end, and then let me go through some of these questions that folks had about the data analyst field in general. And Armando, if you have any insights too, please feel free to jump on in.
Actually,
Um,
can I answer one pretty quickly, just because it's very specific? I
yeah.
saw someone was asking about Tableau, and there's some misinformation. You can get free if you go Google just Tableau Web, as long as you're okay with all of your work being public. It's 100% free. It's not just a 14-day trial. And so that's a really good way to learn. Like that's how a lot of how I learned is I just took online courses and like built online like dashboards for practice. And you don't need to buy a license or anything for that.
Nice. Okay, there you go. Someone in the chat was asking, what are my thoughts on the Google Career Certificate Program for a data analyst? Would these Google certificates be valuable to companies besides Google? I think so. Probably not as much as like doing a regular bootcamp, just because this is a new certification that Google just kind of created recently. So it's going to take some while. Like it's probably going to take a while for the market to understand, evaluate, and recognize the certificate. But I would honestly view it the same as anyone who completed any type of bootcamp program. It'd probably be, in my view, the same level. It's great because it creates opportunity for folks to break into this field, but it's also not so good for folks already in this field because it does increase essentially your competition and creates additional supply of candidates. So it just makes things a little bit more competitive overall. Does data analyst also usually do reporting and analytics? Yes, especially on the reporting front end side of things.
Yeah, in my experience, that's been most of the work I've done. Right, you analyze the data in order for people to be able to understand it, but then you also create dashboards and easy ways for them to digest and understand it as well.
Yeah. Someone was asking about the Amazon technical situations in the Northeast. Amazon advertised they were onboarding IT positions that they need to fill for the rush expected for the holiday season. My concern is what experience is needed in this job and what we need to do to prepare for it. If it's related to like the holiday like packages and logistics and things like that, I'm not sure it's a what happened to my camera. If it's related to like shipping and the warehouse work, I'm not sure it's analytics or like data analytics focused. And if it's IT positions, it's probably more IT, not so much analytics. So in terms of what you would need to prepare for it, probably need to get either certified or have some technical background. Any sports related jobs in this field? Yeah, I know like the NBA, the NFL, a lot of the bigger like baseball, especially heavily analytics focused. There are definitely analytics jobs in this field. I actually worked with there's a candidate that I spoke to the other day. He works for the Oakland A's. He analyzes ticket sales. So definitely a lot of sports related jobs in analytics for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep, go Broncos. What is a good way to get experience using Tableau if you've never used it in a job? You can do SQL practice problems, but I'm wondering, oh, well, actually, Armand already talked about that. You can actually
Yeah.
get a free trial as long as you are publishing your work for free.
Yeah. So you just Google Tableau Web, and it's free, and they have online courses on Tableau's website and things like that, so you can do practice problems. Although one thing, speaking of like the competition, one thing I think is helpful is once you have a baseline of what what you want to do, like look at things that interest you and build your own ones, because everyone does sort of like introductory basic ones. And so if you want to stand out and not just have the same 10 dashboards that everybody builds, because of the example courses, that's a really good thing to think about. And somebody talked about sports, for example. that's a great example of like, once you have the skill set a little bit, you're like, if you're interested in sports and want to field in sports analytics, I think like using your Tableau skills to build like data visualization of like, oh, I don't know anything about sports, but like these baseball players like did this thing and they won, go baseball, Clearly I'm not applying for a sports analytics job.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and then if there are questions about like what is the star technique and like how to use it, I've got a video here as well. If you just type in star method also, you'll find videos for it. What is the maximum time you should take to answer a question? Is more than 2 minutes not recommended? I think it's, so if you're answering like, tell me about yourself, why do you want to work here? Some of the more research-based questions, I would say that has to be under 2 minutes. And then any other type of interview question should be at least 3 minutes. You got to be somewhere, you should be somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. So that's like the general time frame. And then when you are practicing, just record yourself, watch your timer. That's the general time length you should be going for. How difficult is it to go from software engineering to data analyst or data scientist? Because mostly most of the companies are asking for 1 to 2 years of experience. I think it's just the same as if you were to transition from any other role into data analytics. You probably have a bit of a leg up just because you're familiar with some of the technologies and tech stacks. It'd probably be a little bit easier for you, but you'd still probably have to teach. I don't know if you learned SQL in school as a software engineer, but SQL is the primary language that they all use. I've heard it's not too difficult to learn.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you'd actually have a faster learning curve, but we're still going to, as from a hiring perspective, we'd still want to see real world examples, data sets and problems that you're solving outside of just whatever boot camp or certification program that you did. So what types of questions typically get candidates into trouble answering? Yeah, like the why do you want to work here question, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Do you have questions for me? Make sure you do have questions for them. And then also just answer selection has been one of the bigger things that get people in trouble. It's just picking the wrong example from your experience. And on certain interviews, you may only get like one behavioral question where you have to talk about something you did in the past. And so if you only had one question and you picked the wrong example, then you kind of shot yourself in the foot there.
What would you say is like a wrong example?
So like there's the tell me what is your greatest weakness, and then you pick something that's like vital to being successful in the role, right? Like if I asked you what's your greatest weakness and you were like, oh, so I just learned SQL yesterday, but I'm a fast learner, right? I'm a fast learner. Let me tell you about how quickly I can learn things, right? And then you
I
blah,
just
blah, blah,
figured
blah,
out
blah.
join tables 15 minutes before this call.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so like that would be an example of a bad answer. It may be extremely honest. It may work 5% of the time because the interviewer is like, wow, I love this guy. He's so honest. But 95% of the time, if you pick something that's absolutely critical to being successful in the role, that would be a bad example.
So Corey, if somebody was with you on an interview as their initial interview and they literally told you that they learned SQL over the weekend and they're interviewing for this job, what's your reaction?
Yeah, probably not moving forward.
I will say though, for someone who already has programming experience, like SQL is, as far as programming languages go, because it's all just like relationships to databases.
Yeah.
One of the most like, even if you don't know anything programming, it's one of the few languages I've seen where like somebody could look at it and be like, oh, I think this is what it's trying to do. So the learning curve, because I've been trying to pick up some Python, definitely if you already know how to code, picking up SQL is much easier than if you know SQL and then you learn to code.
Yeah, for sure. I think that transition will probably be a lot easier for you. Cool. I think I got it through everybody's questions on the chat. So thank you everybody for being such great participants, really good questions. And your questions, I'm sure, have helped other people. So thank you, everyone. Albert, over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we actually did end up streaming part of this to Facebook Live in the group tonight. Figured out some of the issues while I was in there. So if you are in the Facebook group, bit.ly/findyournextjob, all one word, You can go back to the group and probably pick it up from the 25-minute mark or so. In the meantime, I want to thank Corey again for joining us. For those of you on the line, thank you for investing some of your Monday night into your career. We're always looking for candidates to interview, so if you're interested, send me an email at albert@ajobslist.com. If you've enjoyed this event, we got a lot more events coming up that you can also RSVP for, and some of them are this week. On Wednesday, we'll have Job Hunt Like a Pro, how to use your network and personal brand to land a job with Forbes career coach Nader Mulai. You can get 15% off your ticket with A-List 15 before prices go up. On October 22nd, this Thursday, we're having our next resume workshop. We haven't had one in a while, not since May. And we're bringing in Tom Widrow, a recruiter and talent acquisition consultant at the Widrow Group. If you have a resume that you'd like to submit, send an email to albert@ajobslist.com. This event is free, and we'll be going for a full 90-minute session on that one. Finally, on October 28th, we're bringing back Grania Cowan. She's an employment lawyer, and she'll be talking about the legal considerations in regards to returning to work during the midst of COVID-19. We'll also be talking about labor-based propositions on the ballot, including Propositions 16 and 22. You'll find all of the events on our Eventbrite page or here in our Facebook group on bit.ly/findyournextjob, all one word. Finally, everything you need is in our community. In the week ahead, we look forward to your success stories, job postings, and advice to help drive your success forward. We'll see you all soon, and once again, thank you for hanging with us tonight. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.